So good morning.
Good morning.
So we'll look at standards and standardization. This is the second last topic that we shall be looking at this semester. The last one will be the liquid and solid state dielectric material. But for now, let's just look at the standards. It's just lots of talk, and I hope we all enjoy. So standards, a standard is actually a document that is established by consensus and approved by a recognized body, which provides for common and repeated use, rules, guidelines, and characteristics for activities or their results aimed at achieving optimum degree of order in a given context. I should mention that this is a definition from the IEC, or the International Electrotechnical Commission, and therefore the definition is also a standard, so to speak. Everybody understands the standard as defined by the IEC. So we can begin to appreciate the need of standards when we think of two people trying to transact together. That is, if we all agree that our mode of payment is going to be beans, and we decide which particular variety of beans they are going to be, everybody will be happy and will always transact our business. Today, everybody has the Kenya shilling note, the 1,000 bob, and so forth. That is not money. It's just what we have agreed that is what it's worth. That if you have that piece of paper, you can get so much goods. And therefore, you can begin to see why standards are supposed to be there. So what we say is that they must have a common language. So from an engineering point of view, we consider a system A that is going to be interconnected with a system D, and system D itself consists of two subsystems, that is subsystem B and subsystem C. This is what you are going to be doing. Say, for example, if you are given a project to do, we'll find that we have very many different components. You'll have different parts of your circuit doing particular jobs. And for them to interconnect, they must be able to talk to each other. And this is what we are talking about. So if interfaces X, Y, and Z are exposed, they must conform to some reference. And I think this is what I want to show. So this is the system we are talking about. This is system A. It's going to drive system D. And system D is the one which communicates with the outside world. So we have the X. The Y is internal to system D, but the Z and X are outside the systems. So for X to be understood by D, D must understand the language of system A. Y can be anything, because that doesn't matter what is happening. Say, for example, in your own house, you can speak any kind of language you like. Okay, nobody will bother you. But once you are going to talk to the next thing, to the neighbor, then you must speak a language they'll understand. And that's the same kind of thing that you're going to get. Say, for example, system A could be a clock. System B could be, say, for example, a computer board, which must be, or a microcontroller board, which must be driven by the clock. In here, you can make your microcontroller using TTL or CMOS or whatever you want, as long as system B and C are concerned, Y can be anything. It's just understood in their environment. But if the clock is a TTL one, then you must make sure that system D can understand TTL levels. If you are going to drive a load that is going to be CMOS or analog, then you must have an inverter here or a converter here to convert it to the language of the outside world. So that's why we need this, whatever the standards. So we are saying that if system X, Y, and Z are exposed, or interfaces X, Y, and Z are exposed, they must conform to some reference standard. And if system Y or interface Y is not exposed, that it's within system D, it can be anything that works for you. So standards should be based on a consolidated results of science, technology, and experience with the aim of promoting optimum community benefits. So while voluntary documentary standards are crucial in facilitating and regulating industry and commerce, the role is often grossly overlooked. And that's why we have many big different problems. So standards do dictate how products are going to be designed. They do not dictate how the products are going to be designed or manufactured, but may be used to influence the safety requirements through incorporation in regulations. So, say for example, if you went to the ISO standard for food and you want to bake a cake, nobody is going to tell you that you must bake your cake using an electric oven or a charcoal oven or a gas oven. You can bake your cake in any way you feel like. But if it's going to be a marble cake, it must conform to the recipe of marble cakes. How you do it is not the problem. So it is important to remember that standards derive their legitimacy from the voluntary and consensual nature of their development process. That is, nobody is going to force you to adhere to a given standard. We sit down and discuss and agree or disagree what we need to do for a particular product, so to speak. So most standards provide utility. That is, when one uses a standard, it is often because it provides a reliable, though not necessarily the only or the best solution to a given problem. We are not saying that that's the only way you can solve that problem, but it's the standard way of solving that problem where everybody agrees. So in research, standards are one of the most important tools of, one, you can take a new technology to market. If it adheres to the standards that have been set, then it is possible for that technology to be bought in by the market. Two, it helps you transform research findings into guidance documents and thereby provide a bridge between research and industry. Because you may stay in the lab getting very nice functions, but if industry doesn't take it, then it will just remain in the laboratory. Now, this is a crucial link for successful commercialization of the research outcomes. So by providing the bridge, the standards are invaluable as a tool for promoting innovation and commercialization through, one, an efficient dissemination of new ideas and good practices, two, the validation of new measurement tools and methods, and three, implementation of new processes and procedures. And standards development will require the consensual approach which we talked about. But what does consensus mean? One, In a rough way, consensus is a general argument that is characterized by, one, the absence of sustained opposition to substantial issues by any important part of concerned interests. It was just more like the development of the BBI thing, where now everybody is yelling it's the people with the wrong one or with the right one and so forth. So there is some kind of opposition. But if there is no sustained opposition to the substantial issues, not just typographical errors, okay, things that are technical and they are not being opposed, then that standard will mean that we have a consensus. Two, it's a process that seeks to take into account views from all parties, big or small, that are concerned, and reconciliation of any conflicting arguments that may arise will be settled. But the important note is that consensus does not mean unanimity. We don't have to all agree unanimously. All we have to do is that we agree mainly there is an absence of sustained opposition to the substantial issues handled. Now, as their main function, standards ensure interoperability and or compatibility, leading to efficient production of stuff. Safety, quality, and reliability of products, processes, and services, and that is that the product that you make will be fit for purpose or for or safety. But you can use standards to reduce the variety of the products that you have out there, and therefore we optimize based on practices, thereby leading to a mass production. And once you know that once we start producing things on mass, then we can have lowered unit price through competition, and therefore the customers are going to enjoy high quality product at low prices. Information and measurement, okay? That is the test and measurement methods for describing, quantifying, and evaluating product attributes such as materials, processes, and functions, and this thereby plays an important supporting role of regulation. That is, if you recall what we were talking about the EMC, we say that when you are measuring the disturbance electric fields, you have been told that these electric fields shall be measured at 3 or 10 meters away from the device under test, and you shall use an antenna of this particular kind. So everybody anywhere will be able to repeat and to prove that actually what you have measured is the same. So this comes from the use of standards. So typically, standards will contain what we call normative and informative elements. By normative elements, we mean the parts of the standards that shall be complied with, that they must be complied with in order to demonstrate compliance, that is adherence to the standard, and are characterized by the use of the legalistic imperative. That is, all these normative elements will have the word shall. Say, for example, like what, for example, what we are talking about, the EMI thing, which shall say that for this standard, for this, whatever the radiated electromagnetic field shall be below 40 dB as measured at 3 meters away from the DUT. That's what it means. That is shall. The informative elements are only there to provide clarification or to give additional information, and will therefore usually be found in notes or appendices appended to the standard document. The wording of the informative parts will not contain requirements, that is, you are not supposed to fulfill anything, and therefore all these informative elements will never use the word shall. It will not be there. So standardization can support dissemination and implementation of suitable results from research and development work by making them readily available or accessible to potential users in a consistent format as well as aiding identification and addressing any outstanding issues. So, the formal standards are developed by one, national standards bodies, which are usually abbreviated as NSBs, such as the AFNOR, is a French word in France. We have the British Standards Institute in Britain, the Deutsche Institute for Erneuerung in Germany, JISC in Japan, and KEBS, which is our very own, that is Kenya Bureau of Standards, and so forth. But KEBS does not develop the standards. It develops these standards using players in the industry who come together in forms of TCs or technical committees, and they thrash out what a standard is going to be. What KEBS does is to maintain the standards so agreed to. So, and all of them are just the same. The industry is mainly involved in the development of the standards, and the KEBS of their equivalents will just be holding those whatever, like as a library, so to speak. Then we have regional standard bodies such as CEN, CENELEC. This CEN is part of CENELEC. It's a European, but it's mainly involved with the electrical systems, while CEN is for general or even other components. We have ESTI in Europe. We have the Pacific Area Standards Congress for the Pacific countries. We have COPAND, and that is Pacific and Southern Pacific and so forth. Then we have the Pan-African Standards, Pan-American Standards Commission, as well as ARSO, which is the Continent of Africa Organization for Standardization. And also around our region, we have what we are calling the EAS, or the East African Standards. Then we have the Arabic Industrial Development and Mining Organization, and so forth. Then other international standard bodies, such as the ISO, or International Standards Organization. We have the International Electrotechnical Commission, and also the International Telephone Union or Telecommunication Union, and so forth. So informal standards are published by standards development organizations, or referred to as SDOs, such as one, we have the ASTM, or the American Society of Testing Materials. We have the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers under the Standards Association, or called the IEEE. Then we have the SAI. This is from the automotive industry. It's called the Society of Automotive Engineers. Then we have the Semiconductor Equipment and Materials International, and we have Eindeutsche Ingenieure, that is the equivalent of the Institute of Engineers of Kenya, so to speak. It's just an association for engineers. Then we have the TAPI, or the Technical Association of Pulp and Paper Industry, and so forth. Now, private standards developed in-house by a company or trade organization will also be part of the standards themselves. You can go home and say, like the one for those who are Christians, the mention of Joshua, where he says that me and my house shall do this. So, standards are voluntary documents, and no compulsion can be exercised on anyone to use them. That is, you use them because they are going to be beneficial to you. But then, if they are part of regulations in your country, then you have no choice but to adhere to them. So, we can say that when agreed to in a contract or referred to in a regulation, there might be a penalty, either civil or criminal, for not complying with a given standard. So even if standards are voluntary, courts may decide that in the absence of relevant regulation, non-compliance with a standard to which a reasonable man or woman, let's now put the gender equality, might be expected to conform, could be sufficient ground to determine liability. 2. While compliance with the European standards, or EN, is voluntary, for example, the new approach directives of the European Union using compliance with specific standards as means of demonstrating the compliance with the relevant regulation, such as the regulations that will be produced, say, by people like KEBS or the country itself, that you must have batteries of this nature, and that's why you find that you have heard of goods being destroyed at the port. And therefore, members of the European Standards Commission, okay, are required to adopt the European standards or ENs at publication and withdraw any conflicting national standards. The same thing is happening to in Kenya. Kenya, like I said, being members of the IEC, now we are required to adopt most of the standards that have been produced by IEC, and we must withdraw any national standards that we have developed when there is an equivalent standard in the IEC. So we note that a national standard is one that is adopted by a national body and made available to the public. So because of their voluntary nature, standards will be different from regulations, which have a legal requirement to comply. So a regulation is a document providing binding legislative rules that is adopted by a given authority. So standards are open access documents, unlike patents, and attract no charge or license fee for their use apart from the cost of purchase. That is, you need a standard, a given standard, KS standard, you must go buy it, and once you buy it, you'll use it now license free. So expert participation in standards development is free. That is, you only volunteer, and experts will always waive their rights to protection of any intellectual property they contribute. That is, once you join a standards body, you are developing a standard, you are going there for your own good, and therefore you volunteer to give the work so that your standard is, or your views are adopted. So it is unusual that a standard will use a patented material, and alternative and patented means of complying with a given standard must be provided whenever this is possible. So if the technical reasons for technical reasons, the use of patented materials becomes necessary, and undertaking from the patent holder must be sought, indicating a willingness to negotiate worldwide licenses with applicants on reasonable, non-disciplinary terms and conditions. So development of a standard that necessitates the use of patented information will cease if such an undertaking is not forthcoming. That is, you stop. You don't want to have people trying to tell you that you must make ugali like I make it at home, and therefore you must employ me to make it for you. So we look at development of standards. So we have the pre-normative and core-normative research. So the technical basis of a new standard is usually established through a program of research that is called the pre-normative research, or PNR, which is research undertaken prior to standardization or normalization. So the PNR is used to demonstrate feasibility and reliability of the technique or the process to be standardized and investigate its limitations. After developing a technique or a process and establishing its boundaries, a pre-standard, such as a publicly available standard, which is called a PAS, or a technical specification, or TS, is then prepared. So PNR will therefore provide a document in a relatively short time frame for evaluation by the potential users. So availability of a pre-standard will provide a basis for further research, usually referred to as core-normative research, undertaken in conjunction with a standardization process to establish a statistical basis for the technique or the process that is being standardized. So an emphasis will be placed on its reproducibility. That is, when the same person does it several times, he gets the same results. Its repeatability, if several people follow the process or produce the same thing, they get the same similar results. Inherent uncertainties, that is, within what accuracies are we talking about, that the values are reproducible or repeatable. So, the activity of establishing a standard is aimed at achieving the optimum degree of order in a given context with regard to, one, the actual potential problems that may arise, provision for common repeated use, and in particular, standardization. Standardization will consist of the process of formulating, ensuring, and implementing that particular standard. So, important benefits from standardization will include, one, an improvement of suitability of products, services, or processes for their intended purposes. Two, prevention of non-technical barriers to trade. That is, there are people who may come and tell that, okay, for you to sell your product to a country, you must meet this and this and this, okay? And therefore, if they are not technical, then those will be called non-technical barriers. And therefore, what we are saying is like, say, for example, if recently there was a ban on importation of maize from our neighboring countries because of the aflatoxin. Now, most of them, of course, were complaining that Kenya is unduly trying to bar trade. And we had to show that actually the problem is the aflatoxin levels that these people have, and they don't even show you how they are doing it. And now the country is also supposed to liaise with these other countries to show them how to measure for the levels of aflatoxin. So those are the technical barriers we are talking about, or the non-technical barriers we are talking about. So it also includes the benefits will be facilitation of technological cooperation. That is, people can cooperate to do particular stuff if they are in the same industry. So formal standards are developed and approved by members of the standards body. In some jurisdictions, development may be undertaken by standards development organizations or SDO based on a consensus. So development of formal standards will typically follow the processes and procedures laid out in the Directive Part 1 and Part 2 of the ISO/IEC. Okay? And formal standards will be developed by, one, independent experts who are enjoined in the technical thesis that are, or technical committees that are developing the standard. Two, nominated by members of the standards organization. And three, all will vote on a voluntary basis within technical committees or TCs dealing with the standards in the particular area of technology and business. So, approval of standards and standards documents is the responsibility of the membership of the standards organization. So, depending on the status of the development, approval will either be given by, one, the membership of the TC in the case of a publicly available standard or technical specification or a technical report, or the full membership of the standards body in the case of an international standard or IS or a European standard or ES. So the process of developing international standards, the deliverables from a new work item, proposal, or usually called a NIP, to publication of the international standard is illustrated below. Now, my problem here is that the figure was quite big, and therefore it might not be possible to look at to see this, but this particular diagram is available in the accompanying class notes that I've given. So the process takes 18 to 30 months to produce a draft international standard and 36 to 48 months to publish an international standard. So a standardization can support dissemination and implementation of suitable outputs from R&D, that is research and development projects, through making them more accessible to the stakeholders and other interested parties in an open and consistent format. And the new emerging areas of technology, preparation of preliminary standard documents such as workshop agreements, PAS or TS, provides users with a structured procedure that they can evaluate and modify in light of further experience. A good example is that today, before a technology is introduced or a service is introduced, many people start by standardization. And as given by the 3GPP, or the third generation partnership project, okay, the ones who are developing standards for the 5G new radio standards, okay, we can see that even before the new radio, the 5G was deployed, already we had standards already coming out of what that particular platform is going to work in. So although such documents are subject to further development, users can have a high level of confidence that they represent the existing good practice. So when research results are subject to the formal standardization process, identifying and addressing outstanding issues not previously apparent will be facilitated, because you are talking to your peers and experts as well. So however, not all outputs from R&D projects will be suitable for preparation of standards. So even where this is the case, the output may still provide vital support to new or existing standards through validation of the test or the method, say for example. So participation on standardization activities is almost universally on a voluntary basis. And the cost of participation in a TC or in the TCs will vary from country to country, with some national standards body making a charge to cover administration costs, while some do not. In some countries, support for participating in meetings, especially where overseas travel is involved, may be provided. So in the country, like in Kenya itself, if you are going to go to the technical committees, which are usually housed at the KEBS office on Popo Road, you will be facilitated with a token, say for example, fuel or transport allowance, so to speak, to get to the meetings there, but you will not be paid allowance. So most works on standards development can be undertaken through email or teleconferencing, but it is usual for most projects to have at least one physical meeting during a standards development process. Today, we have meetings only online, and we are able to thrash out different problems because of the COVID issues. So for an international standard, this may mean traveling half around the world for a 1 or 2 hour meeting. Say for example, if your TC is going to meet in, say, a place like Melbourne, then you'll have to travel about 30 hours to go there. And most meetings don't usually take more than 2 hours. Okay, so you spend 60 hours traveling there and back for only 2 hours of meeting. And that's why you find that most of the time the face-to-face meetings are usually arranged such that they occur when the IEC hold their general, their AGMs. So most organizations such as the SMEs, NGOs, or consumer groups may find this very difficult to do, because everybody is a stakeholder in the development of a standard. You as a consumer, the manufacturer, or the retailer, all of them have a stake in the standard development. So while physical meetings might provide direct and immediate input to a project, participation via correspondence and other electronic means can be more effective, since it can be accomplished at a time and place of convenience to that particular individual. So the decision tree for a standard development is as shown, and again, this one looks a little bit too small. So this I'll advise you go and look at the accompanying document. So that's just the continuation of that decision tree of how to make the whatever the standard itself. So, practical details of the standards development. We'll consider the ISO standardization process just as the example. I know we are in electrical engineering and therefore we should have given the International Electrotechnical Commission process, but International Electrotechnical Commission and ISO, they have a standing and they have an understanding, and therefore the procedures are actually almost identical. ISO deals with all the other types of standards. IEC deals only with standards that are directed towards electrotechnical industry. So the membership of an ISO TC will consist of participating or P members who are the national members of the ISO wishing to participate in the network, in the work of the TC. Then we have observer or O members who are national members of ISO wishing to observe the work of the TC without actively participating in it. Remember, for you to be a P member, of course, you have to pay some money out of it, and therefore observe many countries, especially African countries, many of them are members, are O members in many of the technical committees. Okay? But participating members are mainly people who are developing or who are manufacturing and so forth. So the same thing will happen with IEC. In Kenya, Kenya is represented as the IEC by the Kenya National Commission for IEC, and KEBS is the standards body, that is the NCB in Kenya, and KNCIEC works under KEBS, and is therefore the member in the IEC. ISO, in fact, today the president of ISO is actually a Kenyan. If you remember a guy called Eddie Njoroge, he used to be the Kenya Power and Lighting and CEO at some time. So liaison or L members are members who of another TC or external organization who have an interest in the work being handled by that particular TC involved in the standards development. So P members can nominate experts to projects and have a responsibility to vote. Typically, P members have a national leader committee, that is a committee that has the same kind of work like as the work in the ISO or in the IEC. And this makes proposals for new work to be undertaken by the TC, identifies and nominates experts to work on the projects, and recommends on the documents under ballot. So recommends the national responses to the ballots. So while all members can submit new work item proposals, they have no right or responsibility to vote on the TC matters. All you can do is, you can just give an issue, an interest that you want a standard of for a given thing, but you cannot do anything about those TC things. So L members can also submit a new work item proposal and nominate experts to work on the projects, but have no right to vote on those TC matters. So the O members of a TC, like all the other members of ISO, have an opportunity to vote on and submit comments on documents at the draft international standard stage, that is DIS, and the final draft international standard FDIS stages when an international standard is being developed. So the new work item proposals are typically submitted by P members, but this is not always the case, as we have already shown above. The submission is usually on the basis of existing national work, e.g., a national standard that a member believes would benefit the international community. At least like in our region, in East Africa, there are standards which are being developed now by the East Africa Standards Organization, or EAS, and these involve mainly the primary batteries as well as the speed governors or speed limiters, so that we can have a uniform standard for the three East African, or for the members of the East African community. So the country of organization that is submitting a new work item proposal is encouraged to provide a project leader as well, who will work with experts, because you are the ones who are interested in the first place, and they must be nominated by other members to develop the document to the final working draft or the FWD stage. So they are also expected to provide a draft or outline of the document. So in ISO, approval of a new work item proposal will require that at least 5 P members agree to participate in the work by nominating experts together, with at least a simple majority of those P members voting being in favor of the development, with abstentions in the ballot not counted. So the approved work items, or AWEs, are developed by nominated experts acting on their individual capacity within a project group or PG under the leadership of the project leader. So project groups covering the same general the same general area of work are usually grouped together under what we call working groups or WGs. So where a large volume of work is undertaken in a particular area that does not impact on other parts of the TC's work, this can be managed more effectively as a separate group, and therefore a subcommittee or SC is usually formed. Say, for example, in the kind of TC that would be interested in is the TC 77, which is the electromagnetic compatibility. It has subcommittees for the TC 77, one dealing with low frequency phenomena and another dealing with high frequency phenomena. So there are quite a number of subcommittees that you can get. For those of us who are interested, you can just Google and go to the International Electrotechnical Committee website. I think it's iec.org or .ch, and you can see what the IEC does. So some committees act simultaneously and are essentially independent of their parent TCs. So both TC and its SC can establish a work group, if approve a new work item proposal, and develop documents to go to the committee draft stage or CDs. So work is undertaken electronically in general, but most PGs or project groups will have a physical meeting during the once or twice yearly TC planning meetings. So once experts reach a consensus on the contents of a document, their final working draft or FWD is submitted to the membership of TC or SC for approval as a CD, a committee draft. So this is achieved through a 3-month ballot of P members, with recent changes to the IEC directives permitting a 2, 3, or 4-month balloting period, depending on the circumstances surrounding the development of a particular document. So P members are required to provide a national position through their mirror TCs, that is, they must approve, reject, or abstain. But remember, once you abstain, that will not be counted. So where appropriate, this may be accompanied by comments on the document that contents. They might be general comments, such as editorial. They could be technical comments, and you must say why you reject. So comments on the documents under ballot can be of a general, editorial, or technical nature, and are submitted on a standard comments template. So comments must be accompanied by a recommendation on how each comment is to be addressed. You just don't say you don't like it. You must say why you don't like it and how you would improve on it. So committee drafts are approved if they garner support of at least 2/3 of those voting, with abstentions are not counted. So depending on the type of document originally proposed, the CD can be published as a PAS, publicly available document, or a TR, that is technical report, or a technical specification. So only a simple majority of voting P members will be required to approve a PAS or a TR. So a formal route toward full international standards is via preparation of a draft international standard for the BIS. So whichever route is chosen, it will be necessary that any comments received are satisfactorily resolved before publication or progress to the BIS stage. So this is normally done at a comments resolution meeting under the leadership of the project manager or the project leader. So once comments have been addressed to the satisfaction of all commenting members, the document is either sent for publication or submitted for its draft international standard ballot. And the BIS ballot runs over a 5-month period during which each ISO member or the IEC member has an opportunity to review and comment on the document. So approval of the document requires at least 2/3 of P members of the TC responsible for the document to be in favor and no more than a quarter of the total votes against. So any abstentions or negative votes are unaccompanied by technical reasons for rejection are not counted. So comments received during the ballot must be resolved before the document is ready for its formal final draft international standard vote. So the FDIS stage may be omitted if the document is approved and no technical comments have been submitted. And the FDIS ballot will then run for 2 months, in which time all members of the ISO have an opportunity to, once, approve the document with editorial comments where necessary. 2, they may abstain from the voting. Or 3, they may reject the document and give the technical reasons why they have done so. So the requirements for approval for FIDS are the same as those for the draft international standard. So in SEN, all members are automatically members of all TCs. However, to take part in the work of a given TC, a member must appoint a representative to the TC in order to access the relevant committee documents. So, unlike ISO, which operates on the principle of one member, one vote, SEN operates on a weighted voting system, giving larger economies a larger percentage of the votes. So weighted voting applies to the new work item proposals, battles for the TS and EN, and to approve ballots of both types of publications. So inventive step refers to something that is not obvious to those that are skilled in the art, that is something that another expert would not do as a matter of course as a consequence of their training. So all standards have the following specific to each document. 1, this will have a unique number that includes the source of the document and or its status, as well as year of approval. An example is the ISO 9001 of 2008, the European standard UEN 13485 of 2003, the European standard 1071 part 3 of 2001, ISO, the technical specification 80,004, and so forth. Okay. 2, it will then have a title consisting of up to 3 standards. This also what the IEC 60,000 series is also very important for us, especially for those of us who are in whatever power systems and machines. Okay. Title consisting of up to 3 elements. 1, an introductory element giving the general field to which the document belongs, often the title of the committee responsible for the document. 2, it must have a main element indicating the principal subject that is handled by that standards document. And 3rd, the complementary element giving specific aspect of the main element that is addressed in the document. So scope will define defining the subject of the document and aspects covered, and this should indicate any limits to applicability of the document or particular parts of it, and should reflect the title while the title reflects the scope. It is important to agree on the scope as early as possible for all experts to be fully aware of what they are trying to develop. That is, you must know how much, what are we trying to standardize, what are we trying to whatever, and what do we expect to get out of it. Okay, we agree this before we start work. So normative references, that is a list of other standards that form parts of which form an integral part of the document, and without reference to which it is impossible to comply with the standard established by that document. That is, if you are making a standard on, say, for example, speed governance, you might use a standard on the components that go to making the speed governance, and therefore you have to quote these particular references, okay, that you are referring to. So terms and definitions, a list may be provided or reference made to other documents where these terms are defined. The IEC has a standard of definitions, and all other standards therefore usually have a reference to that particular standard for the definitions. So for example, for those of us who draw, we draw circuits or the schematic diagrams, we have seen there are those ones who use the inductor as in terms of coils. That is a standard developed by the IEEE, but the IEC standard is usually a rectangular box that is completely darkened, that is a black box, so to speak, that will represent an inductor in the IEC standard. The resistor is usually a rectangle as well, but open, that is not filled. Okay? The capacitors and so forth, all those symbols that you are using, they are all as coming from a standard that has been developed, and therefore most of the time is just that we don't keep on referring to the particular standard that we are looking at. But all the things that we deal with in electrical engineering, they are all standardized, so to speak. So then it may have symbols and abbreviations, apparatus that will be used for the measurements in compliance, and procedures written in the imperative form and not the narrative. That is, you are not telling a story, you are giving, you shall do this, and this shall be done. You know, like when you are giving a procedure to do an experiment, you give what is supposed to be done. You are not requesting them how to do. So the data analysis, how the data will be analyzed, and the reporting and results. And then you can have the annexes. So although TSs or technical specifications require approval through the equivalent of a committee document ballot, in which all members of CEN vote, there is no CD ballot stage. The documents expected to be published as full European standards or ENs. So the equivalent of a DIS ballot in CEN is the inquiry ballot, and the equivalent to the FDIS ballot is the formal vote. So there are minimum ballot thresholds for a document to be published as a technical specification, technical report, publicly available document, and a standard or an international standard. And in CEN, the minimum requirement for an EN, the TS is usually 71% of the weighted votes of a given member. So a TR requires a simple majority of those members that are voting, and CEN does not have an equivalent to a PS. So however, the overriding objective should always be to reach a consensus amongst all those involved. So remember that by consensus, we mean that there is no sustained opposition to substantial issues by any important part of the concerned interests, but not necessarily that we all unanimously agree to that particular thing. So The principle of consensus is vital to standardization as it imparts legitimacy to the process of the documents produced. Otherwise, you may find yourself not being able to get through, and you'll be told that you are trying to put technical barriers to trade, like what happened to China when China tried to standardize to claim that the only people, if you are going to sell the communication equipment in China, they must adhere to standards that they had just done, so that in a way such that only Chinese companies could adhere to them or could meet them. And this was taken to the WTO, and they were forced to renege on that kind of standardization. Okay? So people and organizations will use the standards not through coercion, but because they are in general agreement with the contents of the standards. So even without requiring unanimity, consensus does require those involved to respond from a position of knowledge, not ignorance, not walking around the country just protesting that you don't want GMO cotton and you don't even know what GMO stands for. Okay? So members, therefore, have the responsibility to ensure that they only support or reject documents when they have sufficient national expertise to make informed judgments. So, members should always abstain when the necessary expertise does not exist, rather than trying to refuse or to agree. And 3, note that if a member cannot provide any comments to a document, then most likely the reason is because they do not have sufficient expertise to review or to vote on it. So, even where a member has nominated experts to a project, they still have the responsibility to give other national stakeholders the opportunity to review and comment on the document produced, and are at liberty to reject the document if the national view is that it is inaccurate, incomplete, or unnecessary. That is, you are not bound by the experts you have nominated to the standards people. And therefore, now there is one organization that is important and is also related to the IEC in Africa, and we call it AFSEC, or the African Standards for Electrotechnical or whatever industry. So AFSEC is affiliated to IEC, and the KNCIEC is affiliated to IEC. One interesting thing is that the headquarters of IEC in Africa are in Westlands, and therefore for those of us who will be interested in standards and standard development, you can see that this will be it's a very important kind of organization to be in. And all you have to do is to show an interest and get in touch with wherever you'll be working in. You try and, interest the organization to the standardizations, and then they become members of the KNCIEC, or you involve yourself in the technical committees that develop the standards in the country, which are housed at KEPS. So that brings us to the end of this particular document. So from tomorrow we shall look at the insulators, and then we can start looking at how to solve engineering problems. So any question there? I'm now open to any questions that you might have. I have 2 minutes in which to answer them. Otherwise, if there are no questions.
I have a question, excuse me.
Yes, Wambua?
I would like to ask, in the regulations or the standards they're supposed to follow, in the event of, say, planned obsolescence, how does obsolescence? Yes, like how products these days don't last a period of a time because it's bad for business.
Yeah.
Something of that sort. Is that also encompassed in the standards?
Well, what the standards do is this. There are some things which have to technically they can't last forever, isn't it? But nobody actually puts in the standard that a product is going to last for so long. Say for example, for example, say for example batteries. The batteries, say they are produced in Kenya. We have what are the oxide chloride? They are the ones who make primary batteries here. All they have to do is that what has been regulated is the product, that is the material inside, that is lead acid. Then it will have 12 volts. It should be able to start a car. If it's for a car, it should start a car in a given whatever, how many charges and so forth. Those are the kind of standards we have there. I try to borrow an example of a standard which you can look at. Then you'll see that obsolescence is not really part of it, okay? Because that one is, say for example, the only way they can be taken to have not adhered to the standard is if it didn't meet some of those things. If you say that it is going to be the guarantees of 2 years or whatever, that is usually done by the manufacturer himself. Because how a product lasts is also the way you use it, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so most of the things that they do is just to tell you that this must be this. Say, for example, for those of us who are in electrical engineering, we are going to be involved in electrical wiring. And therefore, when you are going to do electrical wiring, we usually follow what we call the IET, or the Institute of Electrical and Technology, something in the US, the regulations for wiring. And you are told that for lighting, we shall use a copper wire of 1.5 millimeter square, whatever is cross section. Okay? So you cannot go and now start putting there a wire of 2 millimeters or 2 millimeter square. It's not bad. It's okay. You can do that. It won't blow up. Okay? But the problem is, the reason why they have gone for 1.5 is because those wires, you are going to put them in other components, say such as the bulbs and the lights. And those bulbs, they have been produced to standard such that the holes where you are going to put that wire will just accommodate the 1.5. You get what I mean? So all these standards are just connected to each other, so to speak. But it will be expensive for your plant. And again, the Kenya, whatever they call the EBK will penalize you for charging your customers for nothing, for giving them things that are overkill, so to speak. Okay, because the copper is going to be expensive as well. I don't know whether it makes sense.
Yes, you do, actually. Thank you.
Yeah. So most of these things most of the manufacturers will always try to meet the standard, and only that, because going beyond what the standard requires, it only means costs you money, okay? But what happens is that if you have a cheaper way of going to that higher standard than what is regulated, and you are doing it cheaper, then you can actually force the industry to go to that new standard. That is to revise the standard to that new level, okay? Because you can always, it gives you that thing, okay, it gives you an edge on the market. Because people will come for that one because it's higher quality than even the regulation, and it's cheap, so to speak, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's how it is. Any other question? So remember, even if I've just talked about ISO, the IEC procedure is exactly the same. We have PCs, we have those project leaders and so forth. Okay, The names are just the same. P members, O members, L members, they are all the same because IEC and ISO are actually almost together. It's only that IEC only deals with things with the electrical and the electrotechnical industry alone. They don't deal with food as ISO does. Okay. So, okay, if there are no further questions, then I'll wish you a good day. Let's meet tomorrow then, and we shall be looking at the insulators then. So if the COVID issues open up, maybe we can try to organize a visit to an industry if possible. But for now, let's just assume that this is the only thing we have for now. Okay. So try to look at the document accompanying these particular slides for the parts that were not very clear. And then you can ask us any further questions as we go along. So Aweru, you have an issue?
No, I don't. Sorry, my mic. I didn't realize my mic was on.
Okay, fine. Okay. Have a good day. Let's meet tomorrow then.
Have a good day.
You too.